Abraham Lincoln is one of the most famous leaders in American history, but his rise to power was anything but certain. His story is one of perseverance, political genius, and leadership in the most trying time in American history. From a humble log cabin to the White House, Lincoln's journey to the presidency and his actions in office would forever shape the United States. Early life and humble beginnings. Born on February 12, 1809, in a one-room log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky, now LaRue County, Lincoln's early life was marked by hardship. His parents, Thomas and Nancy Lincoln, were poor farmers. His mother died when he was just 9 years old, leaving a deep impact on him. His father later remarried, and young Abraham grew close to his stepmother, Sarah Bush Johnston, who encouraged his love for learning. Despite having less than a year of formal schooling, Lincoln was an avid reader. He borrowed books whenever he could, reading everything from the Bible to biographies of George Washington and political philosophy. His thirst for knowledge and his natural storytelling ability made him stand out even as a boy. His early experiences working on farms, splitting logs, and taking odd jobs gave him a first-hand understanding of the struggles of ordinary Americans. In his early 20s, Lincoln moved to New Salem, Illinois, where he worked as a store clerk and postmaster. He quickly became known for his honesty, earning the nickname Honest Abe. It was during this time that he first became interested in law and politics. He studied law on his own, reading legal texts by candlelight and eventually passing the bar exam in 1836. He built a successful law practice in Springfield, Illinois, becoming known for his ability to argue cases with sharp logic and wit. Entry into politics. Lincoln's political career began in the Illinois state legislature, where he served 4 terms from 1834 to 1842 as a member of the Whig Party. He supported infrastructure improvements, economic modernization, and was deeply influenced by Henry Clay's vision of a strong national economy. But it was the issue of slavery that would ultimately define his political career. In 1846, Lincoln was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, serving a single term. He was vocal in his opposition to the Mexican-American War, believing it was unjust and an attempt to expand slavery into new territories. After his term, he returned to his law practice, seemingly stepping away from national politics. But the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, which allowed new territories to decide for themselves whether to permit slavery, pulled him back in. The act effectively repealed the Missouri Compromise and led to violent conflict in the Kansas Territory. Lincoln was outraged. He believed slavery was morally wrong, and while he was not yet advocating for its complete abolition, he was firmly against its expansion. His famous Peoria speech in 1854 laid out his argument that the nation could not endure half slave and half free. As the political landscape shifted, the Whig Party collapsed, and Lincoln joined the newly formed Republican Party, which opposed slavery's expansion. The Lincoln-Douglas debates and national recognition. In 1858, Lincoln ran for the U.S. Senate against Democrat Stephen A. Douglas. The campaign featured a series of 7 debates across Illinois, known as the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Lincoln argued that slavery was a moral and political issue that threatened the nation, while Douglas defended the idea of popular sovereignty, letting territories decide for themselves. One of Lincoln's most famous lines came during these debates: "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Though Lincoln lost the election, the debates catapulted him into the national spotlight. The election of 1860 and secession crisis. In 1860, Lincoln ran for president as the Republican nominee. The nation was deeply divided over slavery, and the Democratic Party split into northern and southern factions. Lincoln was not even on the ballot in many southern states, but thanks to this division, he won the election with just 39% of the popular vote but a clear majority in the Electoral College. His victory sent shockwaves through the South. Southern leaders feared that Lincoln would abolish slavery, though he had repeatedly stated that he had no intention to interfere where it already existed. Before he even took office, 7 southern states seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. By the time he was inaugurated on March 4, 1861, the country was on the brink of civil war. The Civil War begins. Just over a month into Lincoln's presidency, the Civil War began with the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. Lincoln faced an unprecedented crisis. The Union was unprepared for war, and early battles, such as the First Battle of Bull Run, were disastrous for the North. Lincoln had to quickly learn how to be a wartime leader. He expanded the power of the presidency, suspended habeas corpus to deal with dissent, and took a hands-on approach in managing the war. One of Lincoln's biggest challenges was finding the right generals. Early commanders like George McClellan were too cautious, frustrating Lincoln. It wasn't until he promoted Ulysses S. Grant in 1864 that the Union gained the aggressive leadership it needed to win the war. The Emancipation Proclamation and the fight for freedom. As the war raged on, Lincoln began to shift his focus from simply preserving the Union to ending slavery. On January 1, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that enslaved people in Confederate states were free. While it didn't immediately free all slaves, it changed the nature of the war, making it a fight for freedom. It also allowed black men to enlist in the Union Army, strengthening the North's forces. Lincoln's leadership was tested repeatedly as the war dragged on. The bloodiest battle, Gettysburg, took place in July 1863, and later that year, Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, one of the most famous speeches in American history. In just a few minutes, he redefined the war's purpose, stating that the nation was fighting for a new birth of freedom and a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Re-election and the final months of the war. Despite the hardships of war, Lincoln was re-elected in 1864. His second inaugural address was a call for healing, with malice toward none, with charity for all. By April 1865, the war was finally coming to an end. Grant's army captured Richmond, the Confederate capital, and General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865. Lincoln had saved the Union, but he would not live to see the nation rebuild. Just 5 days after Lee's surrender, on April 14, 1865, Lincoln was assassinated by Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater. He died the next morning, leaving a nation in mourning. Lincoln's legacy. Abraham Lincoln's leadership during the Civil War preserved the Union and ended slavery. His ability to communicate, his unwavering commitment to his principles, and his belief in democracy made him one of the greatest American presidents. He came to power in a time of deep division, and through his actions, he reshaped the nation forever. His legacy is not just in history books, it lives on in the principles of freedom, equality, and unity that continue to define America today.